faith. Okay. The problem with all creationist argument, and this is probably the most important slide I'll put up tonight, is that it is nothing more than a God of the gaps argument. That is, wherever there's a gap that scientists seemingly can't explain, or if you can find a quote where it makes it sound like they seemingly can't explain, that must mean that's where the miracle happened. That's where God intervened. Or if you're an intelligent design creationist, you don't use the word God, you use the word id, intelligent designer. Whatever you want to call it, that's where the miracle intervened. It reminds me of Sidney Harris's famous cartoon, my favorite, where the one scientist writes up there in the step 2, then a miracle occurs, and he says, I think you should be more explicit here in step 2. I can't emphasize enough how important this point is. This is the central point, that to simply say, look, I don't think you guys can explain this problem, whatever it is. Therefore, that's where a miracle happened. God did it. Id did it. Even if that's the case, it doesn't explain anything. It just says, poof, a miracle happened. We'll just put a filler here, a word filler. We'll say, God did it, id did it, miracle did it, whatever. It doesn't explain anything. Even if Kent Hovind won every single debate he ever did, even if every scientist in America said, you know what, I think God designed the whole thing, and I think biology proves it, it wouldn't change anything with the way science is done. Because this has nothing to do with science. Science is the search for how that happened. What happened in step 2? If id did it, don't you want to know how id did it? If God did it, don't you want to know how she did it? For example, we know evolution is a fairly simple thing. It's a pattern of descent with modification, whatever causes changes in gene frequency. So if we just take any particular phylogenetic tree, a descent of organisms across time, here's the ceratopsians, evolutionists, scientists offer an explanation for how this diversity, this biodiversity occurs through genetic frequency changes and population genetics and mutations and so on and so forth. Whether that's right or not is a separate question in a way. If it's not right, well, then you figure out how it happened. But to simply say, well, God did it, or id did it, well, aren't you curious how id did it? I mean, did id create this general type, and then natural selection created all the varieties? Did God create each species, and then nature created the subspecies? Did God create the families, and then nature created the genus and species? Or did God create every single living single organism one at a time throughout all of history? Or did he set it up at the beginning and then it just sort of ran like a clock and created it? These are interesting questions, but we're never given answers to these because they don't have answers to these things, because that's how science is done. Science wants to know how it's done. So, evolutionary theory is the best explanation we have for this. It is provisionally true, true with a small t. We're not after, somebody mentioned truth earlier. Truth with a capital T doesn't belong in science. It's provisionally true. Why? It gives a coherent explanation of what we know. It's conciliant. Independent lines of inquiry jump to the same conclusion. That's that convergence the Pope talked about. Again, it's not that these guys are meeting on the weekends. Ooh, we got to get our story straight. I'm going to say it happened 6 million years ago. What are you going to say? 7 million years ago? Well, Hovind might be in on this. You know, he might find out about this. I'll say 6.5, you say 6.5, and we'll be safe. That's not how it works. And even if it did work that way, if they were that consistent, then I'd be suspicious something was up. In fact, there's always error variance in the estimates given by scientists. Finally, it predicts new findings, which so far have been confirmed, and I'll show you a bunch of these empirically. So, for example, there's a consilience on estimating the age of the Earth, right? It's not a perfect number, but there's a little bit of error variance there. From independent lines of inquiry, potassium-argon dating, radioactive decay dating, carbon-14 dating, the age of the moon, the age of the solar system, the age of the universe. These are all different scientists that publish in different journals, that go to different conferences. They don't know each other. They don't communicate. They are all arriving at the same kind of sequence of the long evolutionary history of a very old Earth, 4.6 billion years roughly, and roughly the same age of the moon, slightly less, The age of the universe looks like it's about 13.4 billion years, but this number varies because new data comes in. And so again, you get this jumping together, this convergence from different lines of inquiry. And you see that throughout the science of evolution. For example, fossils show intermediate stages, which is what we would predict. So such, for example, the evolution of whales. This is a favorite tactic of creationists. Show me one transitional fossil, just one transitional fossil. And I remember this particular slide here came out in the journal Science one night. Came out the same week I was debating Duane Gish. He said, just show me one transitional fossil. So I put this up, and well, here's 3. And he said, okay, now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 gaps in the fossil record. Show me 4 transitional fossils. Pretty sneaky, huh? That's pretty good, right? In other words, there's an infinite number of gaps that I will always, as a creationist, demand that you present. There's no amount of evidence you could present that would disconfirm my theory of creation. That's not science, right? That's not how it's done. You can do it, you can call it theology, whatever. It's just not science, and we're supposed to be doing science here. You see this also in the evolution of the skulls. Whale skulls with Pakicetus 50 million years ago, Adiocetus 25 million years ago, and modern beluga whales. Common descent, common anatomical structures. You can see the sequence. You can see how the structures change over time. And in fact, there's almost an embarrassment of riches. There are so many fossils. I'm just staggered that creationists hang on to this, show me just one transitional fossils. There are so many, it's just staggering. This is just a nice little picture of Stephen Jay Gould when he was a very young man at the Harvard Paleontological Collection. These are just this is just fossil mollusks. Right? There's just drawer after drawer after drawer after drawer. Last week, 2 weeks ago, I was at Donald Johansson's lab at Arizona State University. The guy who discovered Lucy, I'll show you in a moment. He just had drawer after drawer after drawer of hominids, and we were laying them all out. I took my 12-year-old daughter so she could kind of see all the cool stuff and meet Lucy. She met Lucy. And there she is. Not the Lucy. Yeah, the Lucy. Anyway, and I just made a little joke, yeah, but you don't have any transitional fossils. And, we all had a good laugh because, just table after table is just spread out with these things. There's so many, it's an embarrassment of riches. The sequence you usually get, and here's a problem that most people get into that don't understand the theory of evolution. They see it as this kind of progressive linear ladder, march from small to large, simple to complex, in a line where one leads to another, and so on. This is the most famous slide ever done from Time Life. It's been parodied so many times. I have a couple dozen of these slides. I like this one, and in particular this one with Homo European Unionist from the end there. It's a very American characterization, of course. I suppose a new one would have the French crawling on their bellies or something. In fact, evolution is a richly branching bush. In which we have an evolution from a common ancestor. Of course, you know that we didn't come from chimpanzees and gorillas. You say, how did we come from them? They're still alive. We didn't come from them. We come from chimps over here, gorillas over here, a common ancestor about 8 million years ago. What's interesting about this slide is that back in the late 60s and early 70s, everybody believed that the common ancestor here was like between 15 and 30 million years old. And Vince Sarich at UC Berkeley, based on early biochemical comparisons across species, said, no, I'm predicting that the fossils are going to show that is in fact closer to 5 to 6 to 7 million years ago, the common ancestor. And he proved to be right. It took almost 25 years for paleontology to catch up with biochemistry, but here's an example of where these guys are not in some back dark room meeting to get their story straight about the age of things. They conciliate. There's a